Stannis has a heart, what a waste of a good kidnapping, and the cast just got a little bit smaller. Tonight we're discussing Game of Thrones 504, Sons of the Harpy on What's on the Box? Hi, I'm James.
And I'm James.
And this is What's on the Box, where we discuss the latest episode of your favorite TV show.
After a couple of really great episodes, Game of Thrones kind of takes a step back this week.
We slowed down a little bit.
We got a lot of exposition, we got a lot of foreshadowing, but we still get a couple of pretty good action sequences. So let's go ahead and just dive right in and hit those points. One of the things we said right at the beginning of this part of the series is that we weren't going to talk about the show as book readers, but I still feel like we need to mention that as an adaptation, the show has to get a lot of information across that otherwise would have been on the page. And to do that, it relies heavily on exposition, more than probably many other dramas.
It's something that the show has been known for since day one, that there are sometimes these long passages of just information dumps.
It's the famous sexposition from season 1.
Play with her ass.
After that, the show really found a way to get that information across in a much more dramatic way, usually by two character scenes where one character has information the other needs, and there's some sort of emotional or physical harm at stake.
Like what?
The classic example would be in season 2, where we had the great scenes with Arya and Tywin. There was a tension inherent in all of those scenes because the audience knew who Arya really was and the consequences that would occur if Tywin were to find out that identity. But the kind of relationship that they developed allowed for the sharing of information without betraying that kind of dramatic tension. Those are some of the best scenes of the show, to date. But in this episode, we get examples of good exposition and not so good.
I think it kind of covers it up by beginning and ending with big action sequences. And it worked for me the first time I watched it. The episode ended and I was like, oh wow, that was a crazy episode. But on a rewatch, it was like, oh, this boring episode has some crazy stuff in it.
It's not to say that this is a bad episode of Game of Thrones or a miss by any means.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the scenes that use exposition well. The first one that comes to mind for me is with Stannis and Shireen. We learn about both characters and we get a lot of information without it feeling like the show is telling us information.
Yeah, we have never seen this side of Stannis before, and it's a welcome change from the usual very stoic, frosty kind of guy. I think lately the show has been more willing to show that he has a little bit of a wry sense of humor, and now that he has an actual heart, must have went to the wizard and got it put in his little tin chest, and now he loves his daughter.
That was a lot of pipe delay for a Wizard of Oz reference.
And another one, Sansa and Littlefinger. That was enjoyable. We're back down in the crypts of Winterfell, which we haven't seen in quite some time.
This is pure exposition. This is just, here is information that you don't know.
Lots of backstory.
But it's motivated very well. There's a completely legitimate reason and an emotional reason for Sansa to be down in the crypts, paying homage to her father and to the aunt she never knew, because that's something that her father would want. And that trigger of being at Lyanna's tomb and questioning what kind of person she was allows for Littlefinger to tell his story of the tourney at Harrenhal.
And I like the moment that they had afterward, where it shows that maybe Sansa isn't quite up to where Littlefinger wants her to be, when she says Rhaegar kidnapped and raped Lyanna, and Littlefinger seems to have this face of disappointment, maybe? It seems like he's thinking, oh, she still believes in the fairy tales that she was told.
Going off of the information we got about Rhaegar and Lyanna at Winterfell is the final instance of good exposition in this episode, where Barristan Selmy gives his account of what Rhaegar was like to Daenerys. And again, emotionally motivated and character-driven. This is Barristan using a kind of parable almost to give advice to Daenerys about what kind of ruler to be. And it's motivated too by Daenerys' desire to know about the brother that she never knew, even though it's a here's information that's going to be relevant scene.
Clearly, Rhaegar is going to be relevant. We got a lot of Rhaegar this episode.
Right. It's done in a way that you're just as invested in it as Dany is meant to be.
So, those were all good cases of exposition. What about the bad ones?
Jorah and Tyrion, it doesn't have the same spark as Tyrion and Varys.
Especially when the first scene together is just them recapping information that the audience already knows. I understand that Tyrion needs to discover who Jorah is, but it was like the worst episode of Sherlock of all time.
It's stuff we already know, and it's stuff that doesn't kind of seem as natural.
I'd say that the motivation is there, it's just boring for us to watch. But the next scene of bad exposition does lack that motivation, and that's the Sandsnakes.
We've been teased the Sandsnakes since last season, and their reveal is kind of a drag. First of all, that's set. Like, are they tailgating at the Sleeping Bear Dunes?
No, they're just waiting for their favorite band at Coachella to go on.
God damn it. There's a lot of information that the show is trying to get to the audience about who these characters are and why they're relevant to the story, but the way in which they do it just falls a little bit flat.
Also, I kind of felt bad for that captain guy.
That seems like a missed opportunity for how they could have worked in that exposition in a more natural way. They could have used the interrogation of that guy as a way of revealing information about themselves in a more dramatic way. But he's just a head in the sand. There's no reason for him to be there other than for the shock of the spear throw.
It also made me kind of think less of Oberyn, because she just said, we fight our battles, and then she spears a immobile head in the ground.
Well, she clearly inherited her father's penchant for unnecessary speeches before killing somebody.
Yeah, let's see if it comes back and bites her in the face.
That speech especially is my biggest problem with the scene, because it's just totally unnecessary when you look at that scene from the perspective of those characters. They would all know that.
At least in Dorne, we had some fun Bronn and Jaime stuff. There was a lot of humor there, and that was a nice respite. I like how Jaime's hand actually came in handy. No pun intended.
And again, we get some exposition there, but it's natural because Bronn knows of Dorne and Jaime doesn't. So when he asks about the Dornish when they're still on the ship, that's totally legit. When Bronn asks about their plan, it's totally legit.
I am real worried about Bronn, though, because he just talked about how he would like to die, and that can't bode well for a character on this show.
I guess we might as well talk about the two big set pieces for this episode, one of which came at King's Landing and the other in Meereen.
Yeah, the raid by the Faith Militant was fucking uncomfortable, to say the least. Between their vigor and the music going on and just the violence, it was a very uncomfortable sequence in a show that has many of those.
Especially the juxtaposition between the raid itself and the branding of Lancel with the 7-pointed star was gruesome. It was nothing short of gruesome. One other thing that's really unsettling about the Faith Militant is that they're a force that can directly challenge the crown.
This is not just a piece of dung flung anonymously from a crowd. This is an armed group of fanatics willing to stare down Tommen and the Kingsguard.
Well, you look at that scene is very well directed, where the Faith Militant on the steps of the Great Sept is up above Tommen and the Kingsguard. I mean, that's no accident. And it really shows who has the position of power in that. And then behind them are the people who are shouting at Tommen in what could be a damning accusation for him.
Those people are yelling at Tommen that he's an abomination, and they're newly empowered religious fanatics. And so they're probably not going to take too kindly, as we saw, to a bastard born of incest.
Even though it is just rumors at this point, the Faith Militant has shown that if they have any kind of anecdotal evidence, they will act on it, as they did when they imprisoned Loras. The anecdotal evidence seems to be enough to hold him, if not execute him outright like the men in the brothel.
I don't think they were executed. I think they may have been castrated.
Oh, that's interesting. I guess we don't see it.
I think killing might be a sin, even if it's done righteously for the Sparrows. I think it might be more suiting for them if they castrated those offenders.
That's interesting.
It does suck, though, that Loras didn't even get to put up a fight.
I know, he's supposed to be this badass knight.
That was bullshit.
And he doesn't even fight any of those guys off. Again, poor Loras.
Yeah, show Loras is really neutered, and we'll see if that's about to be literal. But over in Meereen, the episode caps off with the Sons of the Harpy paying Dany back for not opening the fighting pits. And it ends with... I can't believe he's gone. The Unsullied were so ineffective at fighting these unarmored aristocrats and merchants. It does seem to me like the show kind of forced this death of a big character on us.
I agree. It would have been one thing for Grey Worm maybe by himself to be taken by surprise, but These are supposed to be the best soldiers.
We've kind of yet to see that. I understand that this is not their usual theater of war, but still, they couldn't just like get shoulder to shoulder
With shields and spears, yeah, couldn't Spartan up.
Not to say that it didn't work. I screamed when Selmy got stabbed.
Yeah, both of us. That was one of the more shocking moments of the show for us as book readers.
Yeah, that was not in the books.
He did get to be the badass knight that he's rumored to be. It really does feel like they're just making some room in the salary cap for Jorah.
It does, but I think that the story repercussions it's going to lead to will be interesting. With Dany losing her best and most trusted advisor, she's gonna be lost at sea. She's gonna have to rely on people who have either shown to betray her, Jorah, or people who are relatively new to her, Daario and Hisdar Zolorak.
With Jorah and Tyrion on their way to Meereen, between the two of them, they fill the role that Barristan leaves, with wise advice and a strong sword. It's just the in-between that is going to be concerning for Dany.
And a lot could happen in that, I'm guessing.
Who's she going to turn to, and what is that going to mean for what kind of ruler she's going to be?
Well, I'm sure we'll get hints of it on the next episode entitled Kill the Boy. Until then, I'm James.
And I'm James.
And this has been What's on the Box?
You want to subscribe even if you don't realize it.
You remember what happens to people who don't subscribe.
New episodes are coming. You know what's coming with them, Uncle Benjamin. We can't not subscribe.
Subscribe!